awkward silence, which actually works out as a really, really good illustration for what I'm going to be talking about today, but we'll get to that later. So good morning, everyone. My name is Robbie, for those of you who don't know me. For those of you who do know me, my name is still Robbie, but I figured you guys probably didn't need the introduction there. I am so excited to be up here talking with you guys today. I'm feeling like super great right now. I had like the best week ever this past week. It was amazing, probably because I did not come to work at all. You guys know how awesome that feeling is, right? Now, I should preface, since my boss will probably listen to this later, I didn't just skip. He knew I was going to be gone. It was a retreat up in Muskoka Woods. Fantastic time. Got to meet some awesome people. Had a lot of chance to just kind of like rest. Got to sit out under the beautiful trees by the nice lake. It was too cold to go swimming, I tried. But sit out by the nice lake with my Bible open. Oh, it was so peaceful. So peaceful. But when I got up there, I decided I was really going to try and make the most of my time at my retreat. So I did something crazy, like something I've never done before in my life, at least not for more than like an hour. I unplugged. You know, when you like press the power button on your cell phone until it stops screaming and it just shuts up and doesn't come back on? Right? Oh, well, that's too early. They ruined a joke, or not a joke, a question I was going to ask you guys later. Now you know the answer if you were paying attention, right? So just hold that image in your head for a second, right? But no, so I got there, it was awesome. Being without my phone was weird though. Like, I'm not going to lie, this is embarrassing, but for the first 2 hours, I kid you not, I kept looking down to make sure my pants hadn't fallen down. Like my belt was still on, there was no hole in my pocket, because I felt like something was missing from me. And then I realized later that that's not actually uncommon. Our teacher for one of the sessions he actually mentioned that psychologists have said the majority of people who own smartphones now feel severe anxiety when they don't have their phone with them. I'm like, oh, whew, I'm not alone. Weird thing to be comforted by, but you take the small victories. So while I was there and I didn't have my phone on, this weird thing happened in my mind. It had a chance to like slow down and be quiet. And I experienced something I don't remember feeling since I was a child. Do any of you guys remember this thing called boredom? Like actual boredom, not sitting on the couch, binging Netflix and scrolling through your Facebook newsfeed while you snap your friends. Snap me back, I'm so bored. That's not boredom. That's like only multitasking 4 times, right? Like real boredom where your mind has nothing to do except entertain itself. And in those moments, I found peace because there was no buzzing of notifications trying to grab my attention, no gravitational pull back into all of the work I knew I had waiting for me when I got back, because I know myself, and if I had had my phone out, I would have been working on stuff for like next week's lessons for the kids and stuff, right? It was just so peaceful. And I think that really illustrated, even just for me personally, the importance of what I'm going to be talking with you guys about today. I feel like it's an important warning, maybe, for our generation. Because how many of you guys know that in the last few generations, we have seen more advances in technology than any generation before us? And every one of those advances in technology brings with it some awesome stuff, but also some negative stuff, because it changes the culture around us, changes what it really means to live and work and be a human being in the world that we live in. And no piece of technology has changed our culture more rapidly than this handy device invented in 2007-ish. I was going to get you guys to guess and had a prize for anyone who got it right. It was going to be an iPhone, but now I get to keep, I'm just kidding. I can't afford to give you guys an iPhone. But this device has brought with it a lot of positive changes. Like I got to preface this, I'm not up here being like, technology is of the devil, right? That's not me. If you know me, I love my cell phone. Don't know how it works for the life of me. For all I know, there could literally be like a tiny little dude living inside of here making this work by magic. I don't care how it works, I love it. Love social media. I'm like addicted to the Star Wars app game on here. Galaxy of Heroes, anybody? Where are my nerds at? Yeah, right? I love this. And I really love like all the useful stuff it can do. It makes me so much more efficient in my work. It makes it so much easier to keep in touch with my family and friends. And the hashtag Happy Church app, everybody, who here is using that? Like, who's following along with today's message right now? It's such a handy tool, is it not? Or your YouVersion Bible app in there? Oh, what's this? Oh, right, forgot. So It's a useful thing, but how many of you guys just felt your phone go off and saw that push notification come in? Or was it just me? This is the funny thing. I had Leslie send out a push notification from our app to demonstrate to you guys how distracting these things can be. And I felt my phone go off, and I'm up here talking to you, and it still dialed me, and I had to see what it was. And then I'm like, oh, right, sermon illustration. Duh. I'm actually going to shut my Wi-Fi off so this thing stops distracting me. Goodbye. Right? But do you guys see, in this moment of time that we've set aside, as for lack of a better word, sacred, just to focus on God, these devices still have the ability to shout at us and demand our attention. You feel it go off, and there's automatically that inner turmoil of, oh, we're in the middle of worship, do I check it? What if it's important? What if I need to respond right away? I need to, and whether we look or not, our mind has been pulled away from the moment of focusing on God. So these things do a lot of good, but I want to talk about a dangerous shift in our culture that we're experiencing. It's not entirely to do with smartphones and social media, but they are probably one of the biggest contributors to what I would consider a massive problem in both the world around us, but also us, the church, followers of Jesus, who are called to look more like Jesus than the world. But all of us, inside and outside the church, we have become a culture of people who are constantly hurried and completely distracted. Even people who oh, I'm not that busy this week. There's something every day in the calendar, multiple things, and at least two of them overlap. This kid's got to be on this end of town for a soccer practice, while this kid's over here for baseball practice, and I also still have to get this project done before I go back into work tomorrow morning. We're constantly hurrying, and even in the moments where we have free time, it's eaten up by Netflix, scroll through your Instagram, meaningless app games. So even in those moments where our brain has a chance to find quiet and peace, we get distracted away from it. Now, this may not sound like a huge deal to you, but it is. Right? Some people far more brilliant than me have articulated it very well. Here's a quote from Dallas Willard. If you don't know who he is, phenomenal Christian philosopher. He had this to say about hurry. Hurry is the great enemy of spiritual life in our day. You must ruthlessly eliminate hurry from your life. This came out of a conversation where someone asked him, what is the thing? What is your big number one piece of advice to me? And this was all he had to say. Get rid of hurry. Because what hurry does is it prevents us from slowing down enough to listen to the voice of God at work in our life. It prevents us from experiencing what Dietrich Bonhoeffer calls holy interruptions. Those moments that we read about all over the pages of the Gospels, the stories about Jesus' life, where Jesus is going from one place to another, and suddenly something happens. There's this leper that God wants to heal. There's this person in need of a touch from God, and Jesus is the vessel through which that comes. And then we read in the pages of Acts as the early church is going from one place to another amidst all the busyness of, they went from 120-something to 3,000 people overnight. So they had administrative problems galore. But Peter and John, while walking, felt the Holy Spirit drop on them opportunity after opportunity, right? I'm getting distracted though, which is ironic, because so that's the problem with hurry. The next quote I'm going to read you guys, I want to preface this by saying this dude's not a Christian, not religious by any stretch of the mind in any direction. He's a spiritual agnostic sort of guy, but he's a journalist who wrote a fantastic article called How Technology Almost Killed Me, or something like that. It's in the New York Magazine. But this dude ended his article with this. This new epidemic of distraction is our civilization's specific weakness. And its threat is not so much to our minds, even as they shapeshift under the pressure. The threat is to our souls. At this rate, if the noise does not relent, we might even forget we have any. This is a guy who is so outside the church. He's not a follower of Jesus, but he recognizes that there's this inner part of my being that longs for something more. And I can't hear it over the deafening distraction of the digital age around me. How sad is that? It actually makes me think of a warning Jesus gave. What do you benefit if you gain the whole world but lose your soul? What do you benefit? Sure, you might have a nicer place because you're overworking. Maybe you've got way more Instagram followers than me because you're on there constantly, putting hours into the perfect pose. Maybe you keep your streaks way better than me on Snapchat. That's probably true, right? But does it matter? What do you benefit if you gain all this meaningless stuff at the cost of your inner being? And I'm not talking just your emotional life. It's true that the hurry and distraction riddles us with anxiety, prevents us from being able to sleep at night because our minds are just racing 1,000 miles an hour in competing directions and never able to just slow down and be still. But I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the far bigger problem of our spirit, our inner being, that God made to have a relationship with him. God made us to be with him. And inside every one of us, whether you know it or not, is that inner being crying out for intimacy with its creator. And as even someone outside the church pointed out, we become deaf to that because of distraction and hurry. So I hope you guys can see that it is, in fact, a big problem, a problem worth talking about. Now, that sounds pretty like ominous and everything, but thankfully Jesus, like he always does, has some good news for us. Jesus extends an invitation that I feel like was written specifically for our generation today, to this culture of constant hurry and distraction. Jesus says, "Come to me, all you who are weary because you're hurrying from place to place, thing to thing, constantly go, 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 and carry heavy burdens because your mind is in 1,000 places at once, never able to simply sit still. Come to me, all of you who are weary and carry heavy burdens, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you. Let me teach you, because I am humble and gentle at heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy to bear, and the burden I give you is light." Such a beautiful, beautiful invitation Jesus extends. Now, the metaphor he uses there of yoke may not be super common to a lot of us. Raise your hand if you know what a yoke is. There are more hands than I thought, but right? That's good, right? But a yoke was a piece of farming equipment. They used it to yoke oxen, cattle, and stuff together so they could plow fields, things like that. Jesus' audience would have been very familiar with it. But it was also a common metaphor that rabbis, Jewish teachers of the Bible, which Jesus was during his 3 years of ministry, rabbis would use the yoke as a metaphor for their teachings and their way of life. So what Jesus is doing here is what Jesus always does. He's rolling into town, speaking to the need of the people, and then extending an invitation to follow me. Now, I gotta clarify, because when Jesus says follow me, he means something drastically different than what we mean when we say follow me. Jesus does not mean follow me on Insta, like whatever you like, and just awkwardly scroll past everything you don't agree with. No, when a rabbi says follow me, he literally means pick up your life and follow me everywhere I go. Spend every minute of every day with me, learning from me and my teachings and my way of life, so that you can be with me, but also through doing that, become like me. So that is the invitation Jesus extends when he says, come to me. Jesus is inviting us to follow him and learn his way of life. Now, the way of life that Jesus experienced, the way that he walked here on earth, the way that he taught, was a life that I think could best be summed up using some of the words of the Apostle Paul in his letter to the Galatians, a life that walked by the Spirit. I say walk by the Spirit and you will not gratify the desires of the flesh. Now, the flesh is this big, complicated, we're not going to get into it, but especially in the letter to the Galatians, Paul uses the flesh to describe our own self-effort and self-doing, which is often in opposition to God's will and leads us to sin. But sometimes it's just us trying to do things on our own strength. So that is the two options. You do things on your own, by your own strength, and go your own way and probably mess it up and end up weary and carrying heavy burdens. Or you walk by the Spirit. You let the Spirit lead you. Or as I like to paraphrase it, you stay in step with the Spirit. So the life of Jesus can be summed up as a life just keeping in step with the Spirit. So when we ask, all right, if Jesus is inviting us to imitate his way of life, and that's the key to rest, then we got to ask how we here in a culture of overly hurried, completely distracted people, how do we stay in step with the Spirit? And the key to staying in step with the Spirit is we have to slow down and stay still. To stay in step with the Spirit in a world of constant hurry, we have to learn to slow down. To stay in step with the Spirit in a world of complete distraction, we have to learn to stay still. To let ourselves just be in one place fully. I don't know about you, but that sounds pretty darn difficult in the world that we find ourselves living in. Especially for people like me. I tend to think of myself as younger than I am. So when I look at people my own age, I count them as a generation ahead of me. I am more addicted to cell phones and social media than most of the teenagers I know. That is no word of a lie, right? So this looks like a struggle. But thankfully, we are not alone. We have 2,000 years of followers of Jesus that we can look back to for advice. And there's this thing that people don't like to talk about very much anymore called the spiritual disciplines that used to be a foundational part of the flow of a follower of Jesus' life. They're simply practices based on the lifestyle and teachings of Jesus. Practices that we use to help us stay in step with the Spirit. Now I know disciplines, it sounds kind of awkward, but think about all of us are used to things like physical disciplines, like if you want to lose weight or get healthier, what do? You diet and exercise. That is physical discipline. I've been trying to do that, but my struggle is I hate exercise. I'm more for the extra fries, right? Like that's where I fall. So physical discipline is difficult for me, but it's important. But the Apostle Paul actually says somewhere, and I didn't even think to find this verse, that physical discipline, it's like, I'm paraphrasing obviously, it's all right, but spiritual discipline, that's where it's at. It's definitely a paraphrase. You will not find that exact wording in your Bible anywhere. But so the spiritual disciplines, or as some people like to call them because they hate the word discipline in our anti-authoritarian society, the practices of Jesus, whatever you want to call them, they are foundational if we're going to live a life that keeps in step with the Spirit. I'm going to talk about a few today, but if you're like, this sounds, I don't know if fun's the right word, but cool, I want to look more into this. An amazing book I would recommend is Celebration of Discipline by Richard J. Foster. I do have a copy, so like if one of you wants to borrow it, you're more than welcome to, but it would take us a year to get through all of this, depending on your reading level, I don't know. But the keys to slowing down and staying still are found in some of these beautiful practices of Jesus, these spiritual disciplines. And the key to slowing down is to practice Sabbath. How many of you guys are very familiar with the word Sabbath? Right? Is it something in your everyday lingo? Is it a word that you kind of know the meaning, right? In our day and age, Sabbath is viewed as kind of like this weird religious thing. There are a lot of like super legalistic people who practice Sabbath to somehow please God, which is a backwards mentality if I've ever heard one. And then some Christian leaders talk about Sabbath because they got too close to burnout, and then their counselor said, hey, here's what you need, Sabbath. Great prescription. Sabbath is probably the number one, maybe number two, second to another discipline we're going to get to, key to avoiding burnout. But it is not for weird legalistic people. It's not for Christian leaders alone. It's for every single follower of Jesus, and in fact, every human being. So let's take a look at a passage where God kind of explains what the Sabbath is. This isn't the first mention of the Sabbath, but here he articulates it super well in what we've come to call the Ten Commandments when God is speaking to Moses and the people of Israel. He says, "Remember to observe the Sabbath day by keeping it holy." Holy just means set apart. "You have 6 days each week for your ordinary work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath day of rest dedicated to the Lord your God. On that day, no one in your household may do any work. For in 6 days, the Lord made the heavens, the earth, the sea, and everything in them. But on the seventh day, he rested. And that is why the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and set it apart as holy." So the reason God gives for the Sabbath, we'll talk about the what of the Sabbath in a minute, but the reason God gives, I find to be kind of peculiar. Because if you guys know anything about God, he made the world in 6 days. We won't get into any of that. We don't have time today. But on the seventh, he says he rested. Does God need to rest? No. God has no need to rest. He doesn't grow tired like we do. So why do you think God rested on the seventh day? He did it to set a pattern for us, to show like, hey, you guys can keep going along and doing what you're doing for 6 days, but by the time you reach the seventh, you're going to be tired. You're going to be burned out. You need to stop. So that's why he says to stop working. Don't do any work. It's a day of rest set apart to honor God. Now, some of you in here may still be thinking like what I thought when God first really started pushing me towards Sabbath. I know, but like we're under grace and not the law, so we don't have to keep the Sabbath. It's very true, we don't have to. The Sabbath isn't a do this and you'll please me kind of thing. The Sabbath is a gift from God to us. Look at what Jesus says about the Sabbath. Jesus said to them, "The Sabbath was made to meet the needs of people, and not people to meet the requirements of the Sabbath." The Sabbath is not some religious practice we do to like please God or honor God. It does make God happy when we Sabbath. It does bring him honor when we Sabbath, but that's not why we do it. God actually made the Sabbath as a gift to us because he made us. He knows we need to slow down. How many of you in here have any time recently ended up working 7 days out of the week? Now, if I say working also includes mowing your lawn, running your errands, painting your house, doing, how many more hands are going to go up? Right? We are a culture of overworking people. It comes with being a hurried world. But God knows we need a day apart to rest. But that is really difficult in a world that says, if you don't do anything with your day, if you're not productive, what are you? You're lazy. It's laziness in our culture's eye to not do anything. Take your day off, that's fine, but use it to catch up on whatever you've got to do. Or, spend it just kind of like doing fun stuff that you want. We'll get into that in a minute, right? But our world does not like the idea of Sabbath. Our world kind of makes fun of us, I guess, would be the nice way of saying it, for this idea of Sabbath. And God actually knew that. Because God tells us elsewhere in Deuteronomy that Sabbath is an act of rebellion against a culture of constant activity. I love in Deuteronomy, God kind of re-gives the 10 Commandments, and the chunk about the Sabbath is all the same as it was in Exodus until you get to this end passage. In Exodus, God said that it was because he created the world in 6 days and on the seventh he rested. But in Deuteronomy, he gives us this reason. Remember that you were once slaves in Egypt, but the Lord your God brought you out with his strong hand and powerful arm. That is why the Lord your God has commanded you to rest on the Sabbath day. You were once slaves in a culture that told you you had to keep working. You had to constantly be going and doing something. Does Egypt not sound a lot like the culture we are living in right now? Go, go, go. Do, do, do. And God says, no. I've brought you out of that, so you do not have to. You are free, so now you can Sabbath. Now, what does Sabbath look like? I don't have time. It would take a whole series to just talk about the Sabbath. It would be an awesome thing to do in the future. Maybe send Pastor Lance some emails about that, right? But what Sabbath is going to look like is going to be different for each and every one of us. And depending on our stage of life, if you're like single or married, have kids, you're a college student, whatever, like you're going to have a different kind of flow of what Sabbath is going to look like for you. But there's two ingredients every Sabbath needs. Sabbath is a day for both rest and for worship. Rest as in stop working, not as in don't go into the work where you get a paycheck, just don't work, period. But also worship. That means Sabbath is not the day you park it on the couch and you order Domino's and watch like whatever show you're on now on Netflix. Because let's face it, on our day off, how many of us just pick a new sitcom and binge through the whole thing, right? I mean, longer ones like Friends, it might take you 2 days off or something, but that's the world we live in. That is not Sabbath. That is like vacation maybe. I don't know if that's your idea of vacation. Maybe you need to like go out more, but Sabbath is for rest and for worship. It is a day set aside to rest, but also a day set aside to focus on, honor, and glorify God, to be with God. And I'm going to give you guys a tool for how you can set aside time during your Sabbath to be with God in a minute. But first, I'm just going to tell you guys this. Like, Sabbath sounds like it could be this difficult thing because you've got a busy life. How can you carve out an entire day to not do anything except rest and worship? And it is difficult. You guys are hoping I'd be like, here's the easy key. There is no easy key. Me and my family, me and my wife, we've been awkwardly kind of bumbling our way through trying to figure out what does Sabbath look like for us? What does Sabbath look like for us where we are and with our schedules and like with a young child? Is rest a thing, right? But as we take our kind of awkward baby steps towards implementing Sabbath in our life, we begin to see it for the beautiful gift from God that it is. And those other 6 days of the week, they don't feel more full of work and stuff to do. They feel like more fulfilled. Like stuff actually gets done. There's meaning, there's purpose in it. We feel more rested. We just feel closer to God. So I'd encourage you guys all to, again, you don't have to. God's not going to you're not Sabbathing, writing your name in the naughty list. He's not Santa Claus. But you should Sabbath. As someone who cares about you guys, I'm encouraging you guys to figure out, sit down tonight if you're married, talk with your spouse. If you're single, talk to a friend or your community group if you're in one. And if you're not, you should be, because the next thing I'm going to get to is very difficult and you'll need people around you to encourage you and kind of keep you accountable. But just talk to some people and figure out, how can I Sabbath? If you want to learn more about Sabbath, there is some in that Celebration of Disciplines book, but an amazing, life-transforming book, if you want to read more about the Sabbath, is The Rest of God by Mark Buchanan. Amazing read, like eye-opener. I'm a bit of a reader, so I'm sorry. I might feel like I'm giving you guys homework. There's no extra credit if you read that. I'm not even gonna remember I recommended these books to you guys. So that's Sabbath, and that is the key to slowing down, to combat the constant hurry of our culture. But it's not going to do us any good if all we do is slow down, because then we're just going to be moving slower and still completely distracted. Like, have you ever seen someone, usually a younger person, walking along and they're texting and they walk into a pole because they're just so distracted? Funny story. There's a girl here she's not in the room. She's one of the people on our Celebration Kids team. Awesome girl. I watched her as we were walking somewhere, texting, and walk into a pole. I'm a horrible person. I should have warned her, but anyway, it was too funny. Right? So we don't want to just slow down. We also want to learn to stay still and stop being so distracted before we walk into some poles. Right? And the key to staying still is to practice silence and solitude. You can hear all the extroverts in the room be like, that is a terrifying combination of words, especially if you're someone who wants to go be with people, right? Trust me, I know. I'm like, on a scale of like 1 to 10, I'm like a 12 on the extrovert scale, right? But it's not even just for us extroverts that silence and solitude is scary. Can you guys remember the last time you sat in total silence and it wasn't really awkward or uncomfortable? Right? Like, how many of you go for a run and you don't put your headphones in? I see hands up. That makes me so happy. There is hope. And as a young person, there's hope for the future. Thank you, Jesus. Right? But I'm so bad for this. I'm like, I'm going to clean the house today. I'm going to fold some laundry and do the dishes. What do? I pick a show that I haven't watched yet and I binge through it on Netflix and I don't even pay attention. It's just background noise so that I don't have to face an awkward moment of silence. Because silence itself just makes us uncomfortable, especially the longer you've lived in this world of constant digital distraction. We're just not used to silence. Even in moments that we set aside to be with God, we tend to prefer a louder option. I'm going to throw on the Hillsong album. It's fantastic. I love worshiping along to some Hillsong while I'm doing stuff. But can you imagine if the only time you ever saw your spouse, if you're married, or maybe your best friend if you're not, you had to have noise on in the background? It's like, hey, hang on, before we talk, let me just throw this CD in. Who uses CD? Let me just play this playlist on Spotify. Right? Or, hey, let me just throw some Netflix on in the background. And every time they wanted to talk, you're like, oh yeah, here, let's get with another group of people and we can talk for a minute really quickly, super quick. Got to keep it to 30 seconds, a minute maybe. Or even worse, if the only time you ever talk to your spouse, you used someone else's thoughts on what you're about to say. I love devotional books and stuff. I love devotional plans on YouVersion. I've always got 1 or 2 on the go. I get through them slowly because it's a world of distraction, and you turn on YouVersion and there's your Instagram notifications and confessions. But those are awesome. But if that's the only way you connect with God through Scripture, all you're doing is borrowing someone else's thoughts to digest a passage. And how would that be if I hey, this looks like a good article. Let me just hey, Nicole, let's have a conversation. Let me pull out all the words in here, right? It's not very meaningful. It can be a great tool, not the scripted conversation with your spouse. We're back to the YouVersion devotionals with God. Great tool. Get you up in the morning maybe. If you're not a morning person, start with one of those. But if your time with God isn't alone and unplugged, it's great, but it's nowhere near as impactful as God wants it to be. I love to think of silence and solitude as our loving Father saying, hey, put everything else on hold for a minute. Put your phone down. Let's just go. Let's talk, you and me. Let's just spend some quality time. When we think about it that way, doesn't it get a lot less scary and a lot more exciting? Now, the reason that I save silence and solitude for last is because I think that this is the number one most important practice in the life of a follower of Jesus. And it will look different depending on who you are in your stage of life, but this is the number one. Why do I say that? Because as we read the pages of the Gospels, this is what Jesus made his number one priority. We come across tons of verses that read like this. Before daybreak the next morning, Jesus got up and went out to an isolated place to pray. And that's not a one-time thing. There's a ton of other verses. I didn't want to go through all of them. So I picked out this one here in Luke where it says, but Jesus often withdrew to the wilderness for prayer. It wasn't something that Jesus did kind of every once in a while, or it was something that Jesus did a lot. As you read the pages of the Bible, you get the feeling that Jesus did this daily, if not daily, at least multiple times a week. Now, you could make the argument, oh, that's Jesus, and he's super close to God because he is God, and I'm not, so that's good for him, but I'll stick to, maybe I'll try Sabbath, but when Jesus was speaking to us, his followers, He encouraged us to practice silence and solitude when we pray. When you pray, go away by yourself, solitude. Shut the door behind you, silence. And pray to your Father in private. Now, if he had have been speaking directly to our generation, it probably would have read like, when you pray, go away by yourself, shut the door, and shut off your phone, leave the headphones behind, and bring a paper copy of the Bible. Does anyone here still actually have these, or is it all YouVersion now? Right? It scared me once when I realized that I didn't have a version that I like to read of the Bible in paperback. It was all NIV, and I'm not an NIV guy. I'm NLT and ESV. Those are like my go-tos. So I had to go out and get one because every time I turned on the Bible for my devotional time, I had to have my phone with me. And what happens in the midst of reading a psalm when my phone buzzes and an Instagram notification drops? Whether I check it or not, my mind is now somewhere else. So it's just a little bit of practical help for silence and solitude. Another piece of advice here would be, if this is new to you, if it makes you uncomfortable, to just like lock yourself in a room and be like, all right, God, like, what do you want to say to me? And then just shut up and listen. Might I suggest you start with the Bible? Bring it with you and read a passage from the Gospel of Mark, or read a psalm, or even just a chunk of a psalm, and say, hey God, what do you want to say to me through this? Read it, chew it over, and then just be quiet. You'll have to pull your thoughts back in because they'll wander into, oh, I got to go do this. Oh shoot, did I turn the oven off? That one you might want to check if you're like worried your house is going to burn down. But other than that, right? Like, oh, did draw those thoughts back in and let the Spirit lead your thoughts. Let God speak to you through those thoughts that he brings into your head. Now, so many of us, and I'm like number one. I want to let you guys know I'm not up here saying like, oh, I'm an expert at this and I do it all the time and you should too. I am like struggling with this. God actually at the beginning of the year told me this is what you need to work on all year. Learn to Sabbath and learn silence and solitude. And I'm struggling, but every little awkward baby step I take towards it, the more I can feel God leading me throughout my day, the more I know that I'm staying in step with the Spirit rather than being torn apart by the world around me. Now, where was I going with this? See, distraction. But I know that there's a tendency to say, yeah, that's cool, that's good, maybe I'll do that on my Sabbath day, but like, I got places to go and things to do, and sometimes even like really good kingdom things to do. If you work in ministry or you volunteer at the church somewhere and you're like, I gotta go do this, I gotta get on that, I gotta do, I've got all these good things that glorify Jesus, that help spread the kingdom that I gotta go do. And that's more important than the just being in silence and solitude with God. But Jesus dispels that lie with this lovely story found in Luke. As Jesus and the disciples continued on their way to Jerusalem, they came to a certain village where a woman named Martha welcomed him into her home. Her sister Mary sat at the Lord's feet, listening to what he taught. But Martha was distracted by the big dinner she was preparing. She was making a dinner for Jesus, and that was what was distracting her. All this awesome stuff that she was doing for him. So she came to Jesus and said, Lord, doesn't it seem unfair to you that my sister just sits here while I do all the work? Tell her to come and help me. But the Lord said to her, my dear Martha, you are worried and upset over all these details. Here's the punchline, guys. There is only one thing worth being concerned about. Mary has discovered it, and it will not be taken away from her. Sitting still and just letting Jesus speak to you is the one thing. It is the one thing worth being concerned about. I know we have the temptation to say, this is a busy stage of life. I'm in university. I've got so many classes. I'm working like 3 jobs right now. I have young kids. Where am I going to find time to Sabbath, let alone fit silence and solitude in every day of my week? I'll just wait for a less busy season. Let me give you guys this. This isn't my piece of advice. This is from someone a lot older and a lot smarter than me who said, if you wait for a season that isn't busy, you're going to be waiting until you're dead. I want to show you guys this quote from a guy named Henry Nouwen, awesome guy. We do not take the spiritual life seriously if we do not set aside some time to be with and listen to God. That may seem a little harsh, but it's so true. How seriously do you take your marriage if you never are alone with and listen to your spouse? How seriously do you take your friendships if you never listen to your friend? If you never spend time? Why would it be any different with God? If you guys want to learn kind of more practical tips about what the heck do I do with silence and solitude, a great resource is practicingtheway.org/practices/silence-solitude. It's in the app. Just check it in the app. It's in the notes section there for today's message. Because as you try and put this into your day, it's not going to be easy. I can guarantee you that. It's going to be tough. It's going to be challenging. It would be a great thing if you're in a community group for you guys to just help each other, like talk about this before you go through the community group questions or whatever. Just say like, hey, how's the silence and solitude going in your life? Like, how can we help you kind of figure out where to fit it in, what to do, walk each other through it, support each other? Because again, it's practice. It's not like you're not just gonna wake up one day, I'm gonna do this, and you do it awesome, and you're like this sudden spiritual guru. It takes hard work. It's discipline, right? You're gonna fail. You're gonna bumble through it. But if we don't put this into practice, how are we gonna survive as followers of Jesus in a world that wants to hurry us along and distract us away from connecting with the God who made and loves us? Because to stay in step with the Spirit in our world, we need to slow down and to stay still. If you're here today as a follower of Jesus, isn't the goal of your life to just be with him? Become like him? How can you do that if you're not staying in step with him, spending time in his presence? But if you're here today and you're not a follower of Jesus, and you hear the state of our world and you're like, that is me. I am so hurried. I am so distracted. I'm riddled with anxiety. I can't find peace. My mind is just a mess right now. And you want the rest that Jesus is talking about. Then let me extend to you the same invitation he's been extending for millennia. Follow him. Come to me, he says, all of you who are weary and carry heavy burdens, and I will give you rest. So if you're here and you are not at this point a follower of Jesus, but you want that rest, let me tell you what you have to do to earn it. Nothing. There is nothing you can do. You can't work your way into the rest of God. All you can do is accept it. Because see, Jesus, he's our rabbi, he's our teacher, but he's so much more than that. He is God who came down to earth because he made us and loves us, and the sole purpose he made us for is relationship with him. But that relationship was broken when we decided to do things on our own strength, go our own way, and rebel against him. That caused a break in the relationship that we can't fix on our own. And God, knowing that, came to fix it through Jesus and his death on the cross, so that you could have an intimate, true relationship with the God who created and loves you. So if you're here today and you don't have that, but you want it, I'm going to pray, and you just, in the quiet of your own heart, kind of repeat these words after me in your own way, just between you and God. Let's all close our eyes. Father, thank you that you love me so much, that you made me for relationship with you, and that you died on the cross to fix that relationship. want to follow you. Be with me. Show me how to become like you. In Jesus' name.